In technology, there are really two levels of understanding, at least two big ones that I can see. One is the configuration side. Like I can configure a VPN and I know kind of what it does. And then there's a whole nother level that says, okay, I can configure, I know what it does, and I know how it works. Now, some people consider the how it works as like a peripheral, like, well, yeah, I guess that'd be nice, but I consider it one of the mandatory things because that's really where your troubleshooting skill comes from. If you've typed in the commands and it doesn't work and you don't really know how it works, you're just going to kind of sit there and stare at debug messages flying across the screen and be completely confused. So this nugget is dedicated to the how it works: encryption, authentication, and hashing. Let's talk about encryption first. Encryption is the scrambling of data so that only the intended recipients can get it. Like let's say I'm making a $500 PayPal payment to eBay, right, to buy some Cisco gear online. I don't want anybody to know that I'm spending $500 or my account number or my password or anything dealing with this transaction except me and PayPal. They are the only two that need to see that. So I'm going to encrypt or scramble that data. Now, most of the time, we're going to be using a symmetric encryption algorithm. And that means each peer uses the same key to encrypt and decrypt the data, or that's known as a shared secret. So think of it like this. I'm going to draw a blender. And remember I said there's different levels of understanding. There's like configuration and then there's understanding how it works. Well, there's even different levels of understanding how it works. When we get to the ciphers of encryption, I'm going to leave it at the blender level. So the cipher is defined by the algorithm. So remember we talked about in the last nugget we have DES, triple DES, AES. These are all, everything I'm writing here, is a symmetric encryption algorithm. These are the most common encryption algorithms in the world used for the bulk of our data. And essentially you have a mathematical formula to define them by those. Now those math formulas are open source. You can go to Wikipedia and find out what is the formula, I use formula loosely, or what is the algorithm that AES uses to encrypt its data. It's well published. Like anybody can see the formula. So we take that formula, which is the blender, and then combine it with a shared secret. We plug this shared secret that both routers know into that and go, and by the way, you throw the data in there too, and it goes and spits out some junk, and that is going to be the encrypted version of this. The only way you're decrypting that is if you have the formula, which everybody in the world does, and you have the shared secret. That's the missing piece of this, that you can't decrypt it either without a shared secret. So now we get to the question of like, well, okay, so here's me, right, and here's PayPal. Or I mean, we're talking about VPNs, right? So here's site A and here's site B, and we've got a tunnel between them. And VPNs use symmetric encryption all the time for almost all of their data. So now we're asking the question: okay, if both sides need to have this shared secret, how does side 1 send it to side B? Or how does my web browser get it to PayPal without evil person X sitting in the middle who now captures and uses that shared secret to decrypt my data? So that's the big question, and that's why there's two flavors of encryption on this screen, right? The second flavor is called asymmetric encryption. And this is where a peer uses one key to decrypt, or sorry, one key to encrypt and another key to decrypt, or some people call this public-private encryption. It's going to be a lot easier for me to describe asymmetric encryption using this slide, so let me do that. This concept that I'm about to describe is applicable to VPNs, but just as well as almost every public security that's out there. So when I go to PayPal, it uses a system like this. When I go to my online bank, it uses a system like this. When I SSH to a device, it uses a system like this. So such a big topic. Let's pretend for a moment, right, that this isn't a router. This is actually PayPal, because it's a little more applicable to what we do every day. And then I'll apply it to site-to-site VPNs. And this is you and me sitting here doing some kind of PayPal transfer, right? So when you open your web browser and go to PayPal, they actually send you a certificate. Now that certificate, you've probably seen in your web browser where it's like, oh, certificate error, something like that. It has a little folded corner there. So that certificate says, I am PayPal. This certificate is valid from these date range. I mean, it's got a bunch of general information on there. It has a stamp of approval on there. And that stamp represents the certificate authority who approved it. And these are places like VeriSign out on the internet. Essentially, somebody that your and I's web browser trusts. That's why we don't get a certificate security error when we go to PayPal, is because it's a well-known site. Somebody had to come and say, "I give you my blessing. Here's a certificate that says I really know that you are PayPal," right? Gives kind of a warm, fuzzy feeling on that. And then also on the certificate is, looks a little better than that, but it is a public key. The public key is actually half of an encryption formula. Now you can see I have DH public. That stands for Diffie-Hellman public key. And what that is essentially an encryption formula that is only half complete. So the website will say PayPal hands me a public key, which only their private key has the ability to decrypt. So anything, and let me just put it this way, anything that I encrypt with the public key can only be decrypted by the private key. So my computer, my web browser, actually Firefox, Safari, Chrome, Internet Explorer, whatever you're using, generates this shared secret. The missing piece that you need for that AES or DES or whatever algorithm you're using for your encryption, in order for that to work, you generate that shared secret. The computer then takes the Diffie-Hellman public key and goes, encrypts it to where nothing can understand it. Not even, for instance, if this computer even wanted to understand it after it encrypted it, it couldn't. The only reason it does is because it's the one that made it up. Obviously, it remembers what it made up. So it encrypts that shared secret and then sends that shared secret back over to PayPal. Now, PayPal, the owner of that private key, and they are the only, that thing has to be, no pun intended, that's under lock and key. It's behind a closed door. Nobody gets that private key, because if they do, then you compromise the entire security of PayPal. It's done, because anybody can decrypt it. So now they get that encrypted shared secret, and they can decrypt it with the private key, and poof, now we have a shared secret on the left and right that both of them know. Now we have everything that we need to do that symmetric encryption, to use AES or to use DES and all that, right? Amazing. So, couple questions that I know I had when I first started understanding this. I kind of looked at it. I was like, okay, I took math too. I don't understand. How can you have a formula that you can't reverse? Like, can't somebody who knows what they're doing with math look at the public key and say, okay, well, if it goes this way to encrypt, then I'm going to go this way and, kind of back it out, and figure out what the private key would be. You know what I mean? Like, here's my level of math. X plus 5 equals 9. So I kind of reason it out, and I'm like, so X is 4, right? I can figure that. So yeah, obviously and thankfully there are people far smarter than I am on math. Matter of fact, Diffie and Hellman, there's a whole story behind that. That Diffie-Hellman, Whitfield Diffie and Martin Hellman, was a college professor and student, and Whitfield Diffie, the student, they were working together to try and figure out an irreversible math formula. Essentially, if you had one side, you can't figure out the other, and that's what they created. That's where the Diffie-Hellman formula came from. Is now you have this irreversible formula. Now, I will say it is only a theory that you can't reverse that formula. Now, it's a theory that has been proven true for 30 years now, but it's still a theory. It's still out there as kind of like, well, it's somebody, it's probably going to be someone from the Netherlands, because that's where all the hackers of the world seem to come from, or China, to where somebody in that, they're going to look at it and be like, I bet you we never thought of it this way. We can reverse it, and there it is. Oh, and then worldwide security crumbles. Who knows? But that's the theory anyway. So without getting into the formula itself, just take my word from it. You can't figure it out backwards. Okay. Second question I had, right? I said, okay, what's up with the shared secret? Like, if you've got this public key, don't you kind of have security anyway? Can't I just encrypt my $500 with the public key? And for that matter, why don't I just get a public and private key on both sides? And there we go. We just hand out the public key, and there we go from there on. Doesn't that work? Why do we need AES and DES? Can't we just use public and private key for everything? Well, you could, but it would melt you, because public-private keys are very, 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 very strong. Very strong, so much so that it taxes your processor and slows the connection down. It would be unbearably if you decided to use that for all of your traffic and all of your communication. So instead, for instance, a typical public key length might, a low end might be 512 bit. Upper end might be, 1500, there's some value here that I don't know, 1500, I'll just put 100 bit encryption. And you can even get, like 2048 bit encryption. Just insane levels. Now, compare that to our symmetric algorithms like AES. A very, very strong level of AES is considered 128 bit. Like an unbreakable, you can't touch this MC Hammer kind of level would be 256 bit. You never go beyond that. Because if you do, you really start taxing your sessions to where they just slow down. You don't have the hardware to keep up with processing that. Now, when I'm talking about bits as well, keep in mind that each bit I add to it effectively doubles the encryption strength. It's not like, 129 bit is just barely stronger than 128. 129 bit is actually twice as strong as 128 bit. In kind of, if you've processed the theory of it. 130 bit is 4 times as strong as 128 bit. So, when you're comparing 256 and 128 bit, it's like exponentially stronger. You can't compare them. They're that huge. But when you throw something like this out there, 2048, it's like, pass out, thunk, hit the floor. You like that. That's so strong. It would take so long to break something like that. But in essence, it also taxes our processor so much to handle those kind of things. We don't want to use it for general communication. So that's why this combination of symmetric and asymmetric is so handy. Symmetric is weaker, but every single time you start a new session, they generate a brand new shared secret, so you kind of refresh your keys all the time, and after a certain amount of interval, it's weaker. So we'll say 64 to 256 bit encryption. But it's really good for a lot of transfer because your processor can keep up with it. It doesn't bog you down. These guys are super strong. Crazy strength, 512 bit to infinity. There's people online who are like, I ran my computer for 5 years and it generated a 15,000 bit key. It's just there's crazy stuff out there like that. But extremely strong algorithms, but you don't want to use them for long. And this is where you can get that security over the public network by using the public-private key combination. Let me just throw you some of the modern day algorithms that you'll see day in and day out, just so you can recognize them. DES and triple DES were created by IBM. This is one of the first algorithms. Uses a, technically 56-bit key. Some people say, well, it's a 64-bit key, but when you get into the cipher itself, you find out, well, there's certain bits that are just kind of rotated and they're not really part of the algorithm. So 56-bit key. So triple DES is essentially taking 3 of these keys and doing them again and again and again on each packet. So this was we'll call it a temporary measure to increase the strength of DES once they found out 56-bit keys weren't as strong and the processing power needed to break them became a reality. So then we came out with AES, which I would say this is kind of the darling of like, oh yeah, this is the greatest one to use nowadays. You'll see that used a lot and has 3 different strengths, 128, 192, and 256-bit keys. And notice each one of these is symmetric. That's the little S I have each one after each one. These 2 on the end are asymmetric keys. So we have RSA and Diffie-Hellman. Diffie-Hellman was the one I was talking about. That's the one that was developed first. RSA is, who was it? Revere, it's like, I can't remember that. It's like Revere, Shamir, and Adelman or Alderman or something like that. 3 guys that bonded together to create something that was like Diffie-Hellman. It actually has some improvements over it, but same kind of concept, public and private key. You'll see these used all the time, for instance, for SSH, stuff like that. I say used for miscellaneous encryption. Diffie-Hellman is used all the time on VPN connections. So these are the algorithms you'll see day in and day out. So encryption, put it in the bucket, close the lid, it's done. Let's now move into authentication. As in, how do you know the other side really is who they say they are? Smaller deployments use something called pre-shared keys. So let's say I've got router 1 and router 2. I want to do a site-to-site VPN between them over the internet. Router 1's going to come to router 2 and say, hey, I want to start a VPN with you. I'm router 1. And router 2's like, okay, but how do I know you're really router 1? Come on. Anybody could say they're router 1. So how do I know you're really router? So that's where I would type in a pre-shared key on each side. We'll say Cisco C exclamation point SC0. On both. If that's not a good pre-shared key, but that could be one. You type that in on both sides. Essentially, router 1 sends, using the encryption methods we just discussed, sends the encrypted version of this, or we'll say the hash version of it, over to the other side, and that side goes, okay, I can see that you have the same pre-shared key as me. The only way you would have that is if you were a trusted device, so I will trust you. Now, the problem becomes, as your infrastructure grows larger and larger and larger and larger, and you move from one router to 5 to 10 to 20 to 150 different sites, and then you start realizing, wow, I've got to rotate these keys. It's not good to use the same key all the time, because the longer you use that key, the more chance there is that somebody could compromise it just through brute force attacks. So you want to change your keys from time to time. Now pre-shared keys hits a scalability limit. Every month you don't want to telnet into 150 routers and change the keys, cause the VPN to go down, and all that kind of stuff. So once you grow, you'll move to a public key infrastructure. And that's similar to remember I was doing the PayPal discussion a moment ago. Similar to that PayPal discussion, you have a certificate authority. Now, the certificate authority is essentially a trusted entity for all these routers, and that certificate authority gives each one of these routers a certificate. Now, remember, just like the PayPal example, same thing. It says, this is router 1. Here's some information, expiration dates, all that kind of stuff of that certificate. And this trusted entity, this certificate authority, has stamped the certificate with their stamp of approval. Now, and then they also have, there's my public key that this router can use to start its VPN connections with the asymmetric encryption. Now, interesting little fact, you don't really need to dive too deep, but that stamp is actually signed by the certificate authority's private key. So here's the thing, is all of these routers have the public key. That's why they call it a public key of the certificate authority. And so they say, okay, well, I see an encrypted version of a signature here. Let me try the public key that I trust on that. And sure enough, clink, it unlocks and goes, oh, my name is we'll call it Jeremy CA, right? And it goes, okay, well, I trust Jeremy CA, and the fact that this this public key worked to decrypt that signature tells me that really is a genuine CA certificate. Nobody could forge that signature because nobody has the private key of the CA. See, we get to yet another level of depth in this asymmetric encryption. Now, if that was confusing, totally forget about it. It's a stamp, right? That's all we need to know. That everybody trusts. But I just tell you that to say you can't forge the stamp. I can't go in there and make up a certificate. Matter of fact, if you do, you probably have seen it before. Let me bring up a web browser. There's a website I go to all the time when I buy some stuff. HTTPS techdata.com. You ever seen something like this? It's like, whoa, buddy, you attempted to reach tech data, but actually the server identified itself as www.techdata. This is a misconfiguration or something more serious. Have you ever seen it? This is when certificates don't line up. Now, it just happens to be that I typed in tech data and the certificate was made out for www.techdata.com. So obviously it would be recognized if I typed it in correctly. But you get this similar kind of alerts if for instance, the stamp on there is not a well-known stamp, like a CA signed this that wasn't trusted by everybody, or maybe the private or the public key of that CA couldn't decrypt that signature. It's like, whoa, this is a forged certificate. I mean, so it really raises red flags. But nonetheless, all of these routers in a larger organization get the certificate issued from your organization's trusted CA. Then when this guy comes to this guy and says, I want to do a site-to-site VPN, oh, and here's my certificate, the other side's like, ooh, you have the certificate. It's signed with the stamp of approval. You must be the trusted device that has this information. And there's other exchanges, to ensure they've got the private key and all that kind of stuff. But that's the basics of it. That way, you don't have to type in pre-shared keys on every single one of them. And every single time, this guy also asks this guy for a CRL, certificate revocation list, meaning if at any point someone gets their certificate denied or revoked, this guy will know about it and he'll say, oh, well, don't trust router 1 anymore. I've revoked his certificate. So now everybody's like, oh man, you're cut off. You can't establish a site-to-site VPN with us. So we've seen encryption. We've seen authentication, 2 keys to make the VPN secure. Now we come into data integrity or hashing, the way that we're able to make sure the data does not change from the minute that it was sent. So in hashing, we have our data that we're going to send. We'll say it's my $500 transfer, right? That I'm going to send to PayPal. What it's going to do before it processes that data is put it through a hashing algorithm. Now, there's 2 of them. They're both very common, very well known in the world. There's MD5 and then a stronger equivalent of SHA-1. So MD5 and SHA-1 are, again, I'll go back to the blender. You take the data that you're going to send, $500, or whatever data is inside of there, put it into the blender of the algorithm, MD5 or SHA-1, hit puree, and it spits out, instead of scrambling that data, which is what encryption does, it spits out a hash, or essentially a result from combining that data that you're going to send with this formula. And that hash is guaranteed to line up to that data. Like if that data is processed again using that algorithm, it's always going to come out to the same answer. So think of it like $500 plus MD5 equals, that answer. And if you do that 1,000 times, you're always going to come up with the same answer. Now, that hash is then appended to the end of that data. So it's sent to the other side. This side then takes the $500, which, by the way, this is all encrypted. So it's not, you might say, well, can't somebody get it, modify it, and generate a new hash? Not if you combine it with encryption. If you sent it in clear text, then yes, they could. They could take, all of that clear text data, modify it, generate a new hash, because these are public formulas. Everybody's got them. And then put in, the corrected hash at the end of that. But since it's encrypted, combined with that, they can't. So when it gets to the other side, it says, okay, you said $500. Let me run it through. It comes out to this answer, compares it with the answer that was tacked on to the end of the packet. It goes, you're right. It hasn't changed. So I will assume that $500 was exactly the thing that you typed in. Now, if one bit of that data changed, if I put $500 and 1 cent, or some small modification was made, or even if some corruption happened, it went by a fluorescent light at some point in its journey, got some interference and some bits were corrupted, that hash is going to fail. And it's not going to raise red flags and sound alarms or anything like that. It's just going to be like, whoop, this is not a valid packet. Drop it. It's just not going to pass the validation phase, and it will never enter into the system. I hope that feels good. When I understand how something works beyond just, I type these commands and I know it works, I just get that good, warm, fuzzy feeling of like, okay, that makes me feel good. When I talk to a corporate executive about why a VPN is secure, I feel comfortable in having that conversation and not just being like, because the book said it was secure, because Jeremy told me it was secure. I mean, it really is, and I know why it's secure. So we've seen encryption. Right? We've seen how we can hide data. We've seen authentication, the fact that we can validate who the other person is, either using a pre-shared key or a public key infrastructure. Then finally, we saw data integrity or hashing using MD5 and SHA-1. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.